There is a very specific kind of silence that hangs over a crime scene, a heaviness that presses against your eardrums not because of what's there, but because of what's missing. And the moment my truck tires crunched onto the gravel of that access road, I felt it in my gut, that old, familiar knot that I hadn't felt since I handed in my badge. The air around Blackwood Ridge usually smells like sharp pine and damp earth, a sanctuary I had bought specifically to escape the noise of the world. But that afternoon, the air tasted like diesel fumes and pulverized drywall. I turned the final bend, expecting to see the A-frame cabin I had spent the last 6 months restoring, my retirement dream, the place where Detective Elias Thorne was supposed to finally stop being a cop and start being a human being. Instead, the trees opened up to reveal a scar on the earth. My cabin wasn't just damaged, it was erased. Smoke and dust drifted across the clearing like restless spirits, hovering over a pile of splintered beams and twisted metal that used to be my living room. And sitting right in the center of the wreckage, idling with a low, arrogant rumble, was a massive yellow bulldozer. I stepped out of my truck, my boots sinking into the mud, and the first thing I saw wasn't the destruction of my property, but a glint of silver half buried in the dirt. It was my service watch, a gift from the King County Financial Crimes Unit marking 20 years of hunting down white-collar criminals, lying there like a piece of trash. I took a step toward it, just one step, and the bulldozer operator, a guy with a face that looked like hard leather, revved the engine and rolled the tracks forward, deliberately crushing the watch into the muck with 10 tons of steel. He leaned out of the cab, laughing, and shouted, "Go ahead and sue us, old man. You shouldn't have built on Pineview Heights land." They thought I was just some helpless senior citizen, some hermit they could bully off the mountain. They had absolutely no idea they had just declared war on a man who spent 2 decades tearing apart sophisticated fraud rings for breakfast. You see, I never wanted this fight. After leaving the force, having spent a lifetime chasing liars in expensive suits who thought the rules didn't apply to them, I felt like the walls of the city were closing in on me. So I found this plot of land, parcel 42B, tucked deep in the woods, a mile outside the jurisdiction of the Pineview Heights Homeowners Association. I bought it from the O'Malley family, old-school ranchers who kept impeccable records, meaning my deed was cleaner than a whistle. No HOA, no covenants, no restrictions, just me and the trees. But peace is offensive to people who measure their self-worth by how much control they have over others. The trouble started a week prior, a foreshadowing I should have taken more seriously. I was driving up the mountain with a fresh cup of coffee when a white SUV with Community Patrol stenciled on the side blocked the public easement. The guy who stepped out looked like he was auditioning for a military movie but didn't make the cut. Mirrored aviators, tactical belt with no gun, just a flashlight and a radio. He didn't wave. He just demanded, "I need to see your resident authorization for Pineview Heights." I looked at him, really looked at him, checking his hands, his stance, the threat level. It was 0. I took a slow sip of my coffee and told him, "I don't live in Pineview. My land is unincorporated. Bought it from the O'Malleys, and you're blocking a public easement." He didn't like that. He frowned, took my deed when I offered it, tried to find a flaw, found none, and handed it back with a sneer, muttering that it would be noted in the file. As he drove away, he watched me in his rearview mirror, and I knew that look. It wasn't the look of a man doing his job. It was the look of a predator realizing his prey has teeth. The escalation was textbook, the kind of pattern I used to diagram on whiteboards at the precinct. First, it was the stare down. Then came the paper terrorism, a notice left on my windshield a few days later, and signed, claiming unauthorized structure subject to removal. It was laughable because their authority ended at the property line a mile down the road. But bullies don't care about boundaries, they care about fear. I didn't scare easy, but I did get prepared. I installed a motion-activated camera, not a big obvious one, but a high-definition lens hidden inside a fake woodpecker's nest high up in the eaves of the porch, a trick I learned from a narcotic stakeout in '98. That camera, that tiny piece of plastic and glass, was about to become the most important witness in the biggest case of my life. The night before the demolition, my phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a motion alert. I watched the live feed from my bed in town, seeing a figure in a dark hoodie walk onto my porch, peering into the windows, checking the locks, not trying to break in, but checking to see if I was there. It was reconnaissance. They were waiting for me to leave. So, when I went to the hardware store the next morning to buy lumber, thinking I had time, they made their move. They must have been idling just out of sight, radioing the all clear the second my taillights disappeared. Standing there now, looking at the ruin of my home, the bulldozer operator still smirking, I didn't scream, and I didn't rage. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity wash over me, the kind that slows down time. I pulled out my phone and started recording, walking calmly toward the foreman who was holding a clipboard like a shield. "Who authorized this?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly even. The foreman, a sweaty guy who clearly didn't expect a confrontation, stammered. "We have a work order. HOA confirmed the land is theirs, cleared for reclamation." "Show me," I said, extending a hand that didn't shake. He handed me a folder, and inside was a demolition order on Pineview Heights letterhead, complete with a map that had been crudely photoshopped to extend their greenbelt over my property line. And there, at the bottom, was the signature, Sylvia Sterling, the HOA president, a woman I had heard stories about, the kind of person who would burn down a village to heat her own tea. "You need to leave," I told the crew, looking the foreman dead in the eye. "Right now? If you are on this land in 60 seconds, I'm filing criminal trespass and destruction of property charges against every single one of you." They scrambled. They knew. Even the hired muscle knows when they've crossed a line from just a job to felony. They loaded up that bulldozer and tore down the mountain, leaving me alone in the silence of the wreckage. I walked the perimeter of what used to be my home, snapping photos of tire tracks, the shattered foundation, the crushed watch. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was building a case. I noticed something in the mud, tread marks from a luxury SUV, not a work truck, parked on the ridge overlooking the site. Sylvia had been here. She had watched. I drove up to a vantage point on the ridge, looking down at the sprawling, manicured streets of Pineview Heights, with their identical lawns and identical mailboxes. From up here, they looked like ants. I sat there as the sun went down, turning the sky a bruised purple, and I realized this wasn't just about a cabin. This was a land grab. This was fraud. And Sylvia Sterling had just made the mistake of inviting a wolf into her flock. I opened my notebook, clicked my pen, and wrote down one name, Sylvia Sterling. Then I underlined it twice. The hunt was on. People like Sylvia Sterling always make the same fatal miscalculation. They assume that silence is submission, when in reality, silence is often just the sound of someone loading a weapon. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, but because I was connecting the dots, realizing that a rushed demolition on a Saturday morning isn't standard procedure. It's a cover-up. You don't bulldoze a house at dawn unless you are desperate to hide something before the sun hits at high noon. The next morning, I parked my nondescript truck across from the Pineview Heights Administrative Office, a faux Tuscan building that smelled of money and entitlement. I watched the staff filter in, spotting Sylvia arriving in a silver Mercedes, talking aggressively into her phone, looking like a woman trying to hold back a tidal wave with a spoon. I cracked my window just enough to catch a snippet of her conversation as she walked past. "Bonus is only valid if the land is cleared by the 1st. Yes, the developer is pushing." Developer. Bonus. The magic words. This wasn't about rule enforcement. This was a real estate play. Sylvia was trying to annex my property to trigger a payout from a developer expanding the subdivision. Greed. The oldest motive in the book, and usually the sloppy one. I needed eyes inside, but breaking and entering is illegal, and I'm a man of the law. However, social engineering? That's just a conversation. I clipped on an old ID badge from a sting operation I did years ago involving telecom fraud, Metro Fiber Solutions, and grabbed a generic-looking signal tester from my toolbox. I walked into that office with the bored confidence of a technician who has been fixing routers since the 90s. I told the receptionist, a young woman who looked terrified of her own shadow, that I was tracking severe packet loss originating from their server room that was threatening to knock out the internet for the whole block. The fear of a Wi-Fi outage is a powerful motivator. She ushered me into the server room immediately. While I was testing the lines, I planted a small, passive relay device behind the main switch. Nothing that steals data, just something that mirrors traffic to a secure cloud server I control. It took 10 seconds. As I was packing up, Sylvia Sterling herself walked in, eyeing me with suspicion sharp enough to cut glass. "Who authorized a tech visit?" she snapped. "Just stabilizing the node, ma'am." I said, giving her a polite, working-class nod. Unless you want your email server to crash during peak hours? She waved me off, disgusted by the technical jargon, and I walked out of there with the keys to her digital kingdom in my pocket. Back at my temporary motel room, the data started pouring in. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. It was more like a smoking cannon. Emails between Sylvia and a developer named Preston Gage. A contract contingent on securing the Ridge parcels by the end of the month for a $2.5 million consulting fee payable to a shell company registered in Sylvia's name. She had demolished my home for a payday, but I needed a witness. Digital evidence is great, but juries love a human face, someone who can say, I was there, and I was scared. That evening, I got a lucky break. Or maybe it was just the pressure cooking the weak links. I received an anonymous text from a burner number. I saw what they did to your house. I can't sleep. I arranged a meet at the old ranger station at midnight. A woman stepped out of a sedan, looking over her shoulder like she was being hunted. It was Sarah, the receptionist who had let me in earlier. She was shaking. She made us fake the maps, Sarah whispered, handing me a thumb drive. She told the board that you were a squatter, that the county records were wrong. She threatened to fire anyone who asked questions. You're brave for doing this, Sarah, I told her, taking the drive. You just saved your own skin. I had the evidence. I had the witness, but I needed to rattle the cage one last time to see who panicked. I posted a single photo on the community forum anonymously. A picture of the bulldozer tracks leading back to the Pineview gate, with the caption, "Documentation is forever." The panic was instantaneous. That night, while driving back to the motel, a black pickup truck with no lights on pulled out behind me on the winding mountain road. They tailed me for miles, riding my bumper, high beams flashing, trying to push me off the road. Amateurs. I pulled a maneuver I hadn't used since the academy, braked hard, spun the wheel, and drifted the truck into a logging turnout, letting them fly past me. I gunned it, pulling up behind them, flooding their cab with my high beams. I followed them just close enough to let them know I wasn't the prey. They panicked, fishtailed, and sped off into the dark. I returned to my room and laid everything out on the bed. The forged deed, the developer emails, Sarah's testimony, the surveillance footage of the demolition, and the metadata proving the documents were created hours after the bulldozer had already started its engine. I wasn't just going to sue them. I was going to dismantle them. The quarterly HOA meeting was tomorrow morning. Sylvia would be there, preening in front of her subjects. It was time for a show. The community center of Pineview Heights was packed, a sea of pastel sweaters and expensive haircuts. The air conditioning was humming, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Sylvia Sterling stood at the podium, a slideshow projecting behind her, talking about beautification projects and securing our borders. She looked untouchable, the queen of her little suburban kingdom. I walked in through the back doors. I wasn't wearing my work clothes today. I was wearing my court suit, the charcoal one I wore when I put away the Vandelay embezzlement ring. I carried a thick leather portfolio under my arm. A security guard, the same one who had hassled me on the road, stepped in my path. Residents only, pal. I'm not here as a resident, I said, my voice carrying just enough for heads to turn. I'm here as a victim of a felony. I pushed past him before he could process the word felony. Sylvia froze mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto me, and for a split second, the mask slipped, revealing pure, unadulterated terror. You have no right to be here, she shrieked, her composure shattering. Security, remove this man. He is a trespasser. Actually, I said, walking steadily down the center aisle. I think the only person trespassing was the bulldozer you sent to my property at 6 a.m. last Saturday. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the hall. Lies, Sylvia yelled, gripping the podium. He is a squatter. He is trying to extort us. I reached the front row, connected my phone to the AV system's Bluetooth override, a security flaw I had noted during my technician visit, and hijacked her presentation. The screen flickered. Sylvia's beautification charts vanished, replaced by the high-definition video from my birdhouse camera. The massive yellow bulldozer crushing my service watch played on a 20-foot loop. That, I pointed at the screen, is Pineview Heights equipment destroying a home on unincorporated land. And this, I swiped the screen, bringing up the email chain, Is Sylvia Sterling agreeing to do it for a $2.5 million kickback from Preston Gage? The murmur in the room turned into a roar. People were standing up, shouting, pointing. This is fake. This is AI. Sylvia was screaming now, desperate, pointing a shaking finger at me. Who are you? You're nobody. You're just a sad old man living in the dirt. I reached into my jacket pocket. The movement made the room go silent. I didn't pull a gun. I pulled my badge, gold, heavy, and authoritative. I slammed it down on the table next to her projector. The sound was like a gunshot. Detective Elias Thorne, King County Financial Crimes Unit, retired, I announced, my voice booming without a microphone. But I still know how to rap a case. Sylvia Sterling, the police are outside. As if on cue, the double doors at the back burst open. 2 uniformed officers and a state prosecutor walked in. The color drained from Sylvia's face, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under heat. She tried to run, actually tried to bolt toward the side exit, but the security guard, realizing which way the wind was blowing, stepped aside and let the officers tackle her. I was doing it for the community, she wailed as the cuffs clicked shut, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. I did it for property values. They dragged her out past her stunned neighbors, past the board members who were already frantically texting their lawyers, and past me. She looked at me with venom, but I just looked at her with pity. You didn't do it for the community, Sylvia, I said softly. You did it because you thought you were better than the law. The fallout was nuclear. The Pineview Heights board was dissolved within a week. The developer, Preston Gage, was indicted on conspiracy charges. Sarah, the whistleblower, was granted immunity and actually helped reorganize the neighborhood council into something that wasn't a dictatorship. Me? I got a settlement. A big one. Enough to rebuild the cabin 3 times over, but I built it exactly the same as before, just with stronger timber and better locks. 6 months later, I sat on my new porch, the smell of fresh cedar replacing the memory of diesel smoke. The sun was setting over Blackwood Ridge, painting the sky in golds and reds. It was quiet again. The birds were singing. The watch on my wrist was new, but the scar on the land had healed over with fresh grass. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the trees. Justice is a funny thing. We like to think it's a system, a machine that works on its own, but it's not. It's a choice. It's a heavy stone you have to decide to pick up and carry, even when everyone tells you to put it down. They thought they could crush me with a machine, but they forgot the most important rule of digging a hole. If you dig it deep enough, eventually, you're going to fall in. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If I hadn't been a cop, if I hadn't known how to fight back, if I had just been a regular guy who couldn't read a deed or plant a bug, would they have won? How many other cabins have been crushed in the dark while the world looked the other way? That's the question that keeps me up at night. Because in a world full of Sylvias, being innocent isn't enough anymore. You have to be ready for war.